Good evening. I'm Grover Plunkett, Assistant Professor of Political Science and History at Faulkner University, coming to you tonight from my classroom here at Faulkner with another edition of Politics with Plunkett. Tonight, one of my students, Derek McNeans, will be discussing with me some of the dynamics that are surrounding the senatorial race in Alabama of 2017. In particular, Derek, what we're going to be talking about is populism versus progressivism, the issue or the constitutional issue of innocence until proven guilty, and then just talk about Doug Jones and Roy Moore and the kind of people they are, what they stood for, and how did a Democrat win a senatorial race in Alabama that had not been won in this state for over 25 years, which is a really important thing that has occurred. So let's get started.
Yes.
In your estimation, Derek, what is populism?
Populism to me is, from my understanding of it, is the sovereignty of the people. We don't want a small group of people, of elite people ruling our country and telling us what to do and what we can't do. So populism at its most primitive state is just that, sovereignty of the people.
Okay. So would you say that we're a populist nation or a progressive nation today?
I think that we're leaning more so towards progressivism. And I say that as this past election with Donald Trump winning, who was a populist president. I think now, after everything that transpired within the Trump situation, this presidential thing, before that we were more progressive with the Obama administration. We were very progressive. And a lot of his policies, we can see his stance on global warming and his economic policy. It was more progressive. Now we're, with the Trump situation, it went back to a more populist where he won because he was a populist candidate. And the people saw him as a savior. So I think we're more progressive now. We're going back to that. And we'll talk about this more as we look at the senatorial race of Alabama.
Right. Many see this race as somewhat of an aberration, since Alabama traditionally, at least in the last 25 years, has leaned more conservative Republican sort of candidates. How could such an aberration in a truly populist sort of state, how could a candidate like Doug Jones, how could that person be elected in the state? Is it reflective of a progressive mentality, do you think, or is there something underlying it?
And that's the thing. This thing about that is it's hard to say with everything that transpired within the last few weeks with Roy Moore, all these accusations and everything. If we look at the percentages of, he lost by what, 0.7%, 22,000 or something like that. Imagine there was like 1.7%. What was it? 1.7% of people who just wrote in instead of voting either Democrat or Republican. I can probably at least 1% of those people, they were probably Republicans, and they didn't vote for Roy Moore because of everything that transpired. So it's hard to say. It's just difficult to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, the election really, in my estimation, and having reviewed the numbers today more intensely, is truly a reflection of who Alabama is. Mm-hmm. Alabama was placed in a difficult situation. Do I vote for a candidate whose policies are completely opposite of our beliefs, versus a candidate who has been accused of a number of inappropriate behaviors some 35 or 40 years ago?
So would you say it's more a moral thing? People voted morally more so than they voted on policy?
Yes, and that's traditionally how Alabama votes. They vote on moral issues. Now, here's an interesting dynamic that was at work, and we'll ask our audience and you as well. How many occasions did we get to hear about Doug Jones' policies versus Roy Moore's policies. What was the battleground for this election?
What was the battleground? It seemed to be more so of a personal things. We don't even. Only thing we heard about Doug Jones was he fought against those people who bombed the church in Birmingham. That's what we know about him.
Right.
He ran his campaign on that. Roy Moore, I mean, we heard about his policies for the most part. So I think the battle was more who had a better personal life. And that's what I've seen from this election.
Right. If we look at the results that came out of Jefferson County in this election, what we discover is that Jefferson County overwhelmingly voted for Doug Jones to the tune of some 80,000 votes. That's significant. Doug Jones claims to be responsible for prosecuting the bombers of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. So it's not a surprise that he would get a great deal of Jefferson County, Birmingham support in a situation like that. The more compelling information that we see in these election results is that the way that Republicans themselves voted.
Yes.
The Republican that voted was faced with a very difficult choice. Do I vote for this unknown issue, the candidate who has these inappropriate behaviors that he's been accused of committing, versus a progressive Democrat whose policies don't reflect my ideas whatsoever? And it seems that the Alabama voter chose morality over politics, with an understanding or a suspicion that in 2 years we're going to reelect someone to that seat, and at that point perhaps there will be a better slate of candidates for the seat.
I have a question. This idea, well, we heard everything, all the allegations against Roy Moore. What do you think the expression innocent until proven guilty, how did that play in, or how did it not play into this election for Roy Moore?
Right. To address that, we have to go back to as far back as 1973, when we begin to see the workings of identity politics really coming to bear on America. What identity politics does, it begins to create an identity for you that causes the voter to vote upon that identity rather than using reason to come to an understanding of what would be the most appropriate vote for them to cast. And so when we don't use reason to determine our actions, we're voting on emotion. Oftentimes we're voting on hearsay. It seems in this election there were those that were afraid of voting for Moore, that the accusations might be proven to be true at some later date. I'm not sure that we have all the full understanding of what we've just observed in this race. But what I do know is that the average citizen must begin to consider the ramifications of innocence until proven guilty. Otherwise, we may be accused of something that is inescapable in terms of proving an innocence.
Yes.
Proving your innocence is a very difficult thing to do.
Indeed.
So it must be turned in the other direction so that I'm assumed innocent, and then let's look at the evidence that would just demonstrate that one is guilty. What are some of those things that we get accused of today that are so difficult to prove our innocence?
What are some of those things?
Yeah.
Something like with Roy Moore, I'm not saying that those women are lying or anything, but how do you prove that?
Right.
Like, if you don't have any recordings or anything, how do you prove that?
Right.
It's just difficult.
In the case of Senator Franken, we actually had photographs.
Yeah, we did. That's a bit different.
And so that was a very different situation.
Yeah.
And probably led to his resignation from the Senate.
Yeah.
In the case of Moore, it's an accusation, and then further we have to look into the situation and determine, was the accusation, was it actually pointing toward a crime committed?
Yeah.
Was a crime committed, or did someone act inappropriately? If we begin to judge people based on their inappropriate behavior, we wouldn't have a Congress in the United States today.
Yes.
It just depends on how heinous the nature of the inappropriate behavior might become.
Yeah.
Some of the things that we get accused of that are very difficult to prove our innocence regarding, and the more heinous the accusation, the more difficult. And some of those things that we see people being accused of are, you're a racist.
Yeah.
You're a homophobe. You're xenophobic. How do I prove that I'm not a racist? How do I do that? Very difficult. How do I prove that I'm not a homophobe? It's difficult to prove that sort of thing. And so we have to look at things under a microscope of reason. Here's the pros, here's the evidence against, here's the evidence for it. And then through reason, make some sort of a rational decision. Do you think the Alabama voter was rational?
I think there was a lot of rationality in his past election, yes.
I think the voter was rational. I think they voted their conscience, which is what we want our voters to do. The one thing that I would caution all voters in the future to do is to be careful what my conscience is leading me to do. Am I actually voting to put in a person who is going to carry out the moral precepts that I believe in, or will I believe some sort of an accusation of guilt of some heinous thing? And every time we come to this sort of consideration, I'm reminded of a story of a man who was accused of a crime with very little evidence to support it. But he was accused of being a king. He was brought before the highest magistrate in the land and accused of this thing. And that magistrate says, "Are you a king?" And the man accused says, "Is this your idea, or has someone else told you this?" And the magistrate says, "You are a king then." The accused man said, "I'm a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. If it was of this world, my people would have risen up to protect me," right? But that magistrate leaves that questioning event and says, "What is the truth?" This was a reasoning man who's looking at an accusation, looking at the evidence he has. He walks outside and says, "What is the truth?" This is the question every American has to ask when looking at candidates. What is the truth? Am I believing an accusation?
So the question for me is, not everybody has the same truth. We all have different experiences, and we have norms and values that we go by. We vote based on those things. A lot of the reason people vote the way they do is because of family, because they were raised to vote a certain way.
Sure, absolutely.
So how do a person know the truth? Is it what's true for them, or is it what's best for America or the country in general, or the state in general?
Well, that's a good question, because there's only one truth. There's just different lenses through which we see that truth. Now, if I hand you these glasses and ask you to read the board up there, you're not going to be able to see it, because that's not the lenses that you see the world through.
Yeah.
But what's on the board will be the same truth that applies to both of us. I grew up in a conservative family. That's no secret to you.
Yeah, I know, not at all.
and you may not have grown up in a conservative family.
Yeah.
But our upbringing gives us certain lenses through which to see the world. What we have to be careful to do always, whether you're looking through your lenses or trying to see through mine, is to continually be seeking the truth.
Yeah.
If we're doing that, we're all headed in the right direction. I hope our politicians tell us the truth.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah. Well, we'll just go on dreaming that to,
Yeah,
be,
exactly.
that to be the case. And you know, policy from both sides, whether you're looking at a populist policy or a progressive policy, we have to believe that those that are implementing those policies, are trying to pass those things, are truly looking after the two of us and got our best interest in mind. If we put our political future in the hands of a few elites, I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're even comfortable with that, even though our political views are very different. But I think if we take all the labels off, if we dismiss identity politics altogether, take the labels off, and you and I start with a list of truths that don't change, I bet we come to the same answer. Before we wrap this up, I'd just like to say that Faulkner University is a great place
It is.
to study political science. We want to hear every opinion from a broad range of people. One thing that you can count on at Faulkner is you will be heard,
Yes.
and you'll be, and your opinion will be respected. It may not be agreed upon,
Yeah, it would definitely.
but you will be heard and you will be respected for voicing that opinion. We hope you'll join us again in the future with another episode or presentation of Politics with Plunkett. Thank you for your time.